Hello and welcome to this episode of Beat Teacher Burnout. I'm Rowena Hicks, your host. Join me today as we look into resilience as teachers, as leaders, and where that fits. Whose responsibility is it for us to build our resilience? I'm joined today by Andrew Lewin, who was a head teacher, been in education for many, many years, and he has also experienced burnout. So, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Rowena. Delighted to be here, and hopefully some of my personal experience. Yes, I was a head teacher and spent a lifetime, literally, as I said, in education. I wasn't even born in hospital. I was born in a school. So I've been in schools all my life.
Wow, I don't think we've ever had anyone on a podcast who's actually been born in a school and who's been in school all their lives. So you're definitely a first. You talk about a raw workplace and resilience change practitioner is who you are now. What's your story to get you to that place?
Yes, Rowena. 2013, I remember. Having had a few episodes of anxiety and depression, I became burnt out. I guess unable to carry on. Went to see my GP and was signed off work immediately. I do remember the day. Actually, things have been building up, and you know how getting, and this is not a comment on the medical practice, but you know how getting an appointment's not easy. I was run back and can you come in 15 minutes? And it was about sort of 14 minutes away, and the windscreen was frozen, and I suspect by the time I got there I was in such a state because I decided not to go into work that day because I couldn't cope anymore. And that was a sort of watershed moment. I knew it was building up, and I was fighting it as I suspect we do. I definitely, reflecting on it, I definitely had an eating disorder because I was weighing myself literally every day. I was giving up the things I liked, like chocolate or sweets or those things that were the pleasures because I couldn't control everything else that was going on. So I then went off work. In fact, the organisation that I was with was very supportive, but it was clear to me that going back into the same role was not right for me, and so I had a period of recovery, and here we are. I wish I knew then what I know now, and I am now what is called a raw master practitioner. That stands for workplace resilience and wellbeing. I'm trained and accredited by the Wellbeing Project, and they've produced a robustly researched assessment framework, really, for how we can, if you like, build our resilient thoughts and our resilient actions, and how they impact on our overall level of well-being. It works at the individual level, but the really exciting thing for me is it works at team level and entire organizational level. So when you are looking to create a culture of well-being within an organization, it needs to feed through the whole organization. We need to be speaking the same language. We need to be working in the same way and understanding how the framework works, so that when we need that framework, actually there's a culture. So I work now, and in fact I'm doing it as we speak in a school, working with the senior leadership to start with, to get, if you like, understanding and then buy-in, and then that can disseminate through the organisation. So yeah, it's a passion, I guess, but also it's a personal. It helps me when I feel low. I go back to basics, and I just go, hang on a second. Let's put in a few more of these, and let's look at these.
Okay, so we want to talk about those basics in a minute and what they look like.
Yeah.
But can I just go back to, as a very experienced head teacher, you'd been teaching and then leadership for many years, and then you burnt out. That's your words. I wonder how, because I know when I burnt out, I know how I felt. How would you describe how you felt?
Yeah.
How did it make you sort of respond and feel?
I think I still just about managed to paint the face on and, turn up for assembly and, sit in the meeting and, conduct myself in a professional sort of way. So actually, I guess I managed to fool everybody, except for those closest to me, because I think that's what you try and do for as long as you possibly can. And it was actually half term in the autumn, and my children, and we'd had quite a nice half term, and they'd gone back to school. We had a slightly longer half term. It didn't quite match, and so my wife and I, for the first time, very very rarely, we went off on our own for 3 or 4 days in Scotland. We had a lovely time, but then as that sort of Saturday going back to work on Monday morning came, I realised that whatever revival I'd had during the week, it was, and the stomach was tightening up, and we were going back in. I was going back into that because I knew on Monday morning, and that's when the whole GP thing, because I just broke down that night. Had a great deal of support from my family, my wife, and my mother particularly, who had gone through her own experience of trauma, and it was just, and the moment I gave up, if you like, the fighting, I didn't feel better, but I felt it was that burn. I knew that I'd made the right thing, the right decision, and it was time to focus. And it was time to focus on me because I wasn't well. But no one could see that. I wasn't, I didn't have a broken leg. I didn't have, and as I've said, I had a lot wrong with me, all inside. I was ill, but I was still frightened, if you like, and I didn't want to use too strong a word, of the stigma. He's weak, and that whole sort of mental thing that goes on. I don't mind saying, and I wouldn't wish that I had cancer, but at the time, because cancer had a diagnosis, it had a treatment, it had a recovery, and above all, it had a sympathy that other people could understand. Whereas I felt with my mental health issues, it was, and I was fighting that all the time. So, and that word fighting, it's just a fight, which eventually, and we talk about burnout or whatever, it's just this sort of layered of, we can all deal with the first incident, and then the second incident, and then the third. But actually, when and this is why I focus on resilience, it's just accumulation. And I talk a lot about sustainability. There's a pressure performance curve where you pressure and performance. and it's sustaining that effective optimum performance when actually you're not, and you're, yeah. And then there's family. We see ourselves, and often in education, we are empathetic people. We're giving to the young people, to our colleagues, and as leaders or whatever. We're giving, and actually, it's at the detriment of self, because we're not giving anything back to self.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful, because I certainly describe my experience of burnout as feeling empty, that I'd given out so much. And I know one psychologist I've had on here talked about compassion fatigue. And
Yeah.
actually, I think I'd given out so much and forgotten to look after me. And that was one of the issues, because actually, if we don't, you can't pour from an empty cup, can you? So it's so obvious in one way, but we know that it takes some action, and it takes some courage, and it takes almost energy to start looking after yourself. So if we go into your 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 thoughts on resilience, where would you start, in view of the fact we've only got about 10 more minutes and you'll have to
Yeah,
summarize?
no,
What would you
absolutely.
say to people listening?
Yeah, look, there's a framework. I looked at resilience. I think you use the word courage. It's like a lot of things that we step out of our comfort and say, sorry, I'm not well. We're not very good at saying that often. So what I did, I looked around a lot about me, because I was selfish, because I think we spend too much time being selfless. And there's a sort of positive selfishness, actually, to make sure that we are at our best, so that as a resource for young people, for our colleagues, as leaders, or whatever it might be, we're at our best. Because if we look stressed and under pressure, I tell you what, the young people will pick up on that really, really quickly, because they're very intuitive. So we're painting that, if you like, mask on. I work, I'm accredited by the Wellbeing Project. As I say, it looks at how resilient thoughts, i.e., how we choose to think about situations and occurrences, and resilient actions, which is how we choose to behave and act, either positively or negatively contribute. And we don't necessarily have to go to the sort of big end of resilience, dealing with trauma. It's actually just the day-to-day stuff that comes on. When we're good, it's great, and when we're a bit low, and mood and so on. So there are 5 pillars. The first is very much it's energy, and we've had a lot of I'm sure a lot of sporadic talks on this, but when you put these together, it all comes to. The second one is future focus. The third one is inner drive. The fourth one is flexible thinking, and the 5th pillar is strong relationships. And if I can just break those down, and I'm sure, Rowena, don't hesitate. The first one is quite obvious: energy, and we've got physical activity. Not exercise, there's not a bit of lycra involved, quite frankly, but could we do a little bit more physical exercise? I noticed in lockdown, with suddenly people were walking a lot, and and then they went back to work, and they stopped exercise. It's good for us to provide that. The second one is sleep, and how we underestimate the power of sleep. We make rubbish decisions when we're tired, and yet sleep, and particularly in the environment I came from, the boarding environment, where not sleeping seemed to be some sort of rite of passage. I remember talking to a client. Says, "Oh yeah, I waited up till 1 o'clock in the morning for some trip to finish, and then my young family woke me up at 4 o'clock. So you're going to do a full day's work on 3 hours sleep. It's not sustainable." And so, look after our own sleep hygiene to make sure, because that's important. in fact, it's the most important. We see lots of posters about exercising and the other sub pillar, which is healthy consumption, not dieting, just eating healthily. I'm having a client saying, "Oh yes, I need to have more coffee breaks." No, have more hydration breaks, because actually, water and so on so is much better for you than shoving caffeine. One of the great derailers: caffeine, junk food, alcohol, those sorts of things. And I'm not here to preach. I like a glass of red wine like the next person. However, you've got to make sure that we're getting that balance. And the fourth,
can I pause you there?
Yeah,
Can I pause
sure.
you on that one? Just because one of the signs to me, for me and my children, that I was really very much going towards the burnout was that I was too tired to cook. So I was
Yeah.
drinking more coffee. We were eating a lot of takeaways and ready meals, and
Yeah.
actually too tired to exercise. And that's a real warning sign for listeners. If that's where they're at, they need to reach out.
Absolutely. Within RAW, there's a pressure performance curve, as I mentioned. Boredom, comfort. Actually, we don't want to, stretch, optimum. We want to be stretched professionally and so on, but being very aware that our performance is likely to dip if we go into strain and crisis. And what it is recognizing when we dip into strain and getting back. How would we know, but how would your organization know when people were dipping into strain? It's not weakness, it's just strain, overburden, resilience low, blah, blah, blah. Because the fourth sub pillar of energy is boundaries, saying no. One of the boundaries I had to have at one stage, which I'd sort of put in, but not really knowing what I was doing, is I realized halfway through the afternoon I hadn't been outside because I lived where I worked. And so I used to put the boundary in, I'm going to go out of my front door, along the street and come back, because at least because I've always lived where I worked. And so, these boundaries, these saying no. I always challenge people in schools. They go, could you have 2.5 hours a week? Just 2.5 hours a week where you've got a vital meeting that you mustn't miss. I think you're all now thinking, oh yeah, the chair of governors has come in, or the head has just demanded to see me. No, give yourself permission to have it with yourself. No, I'm sorry, I've got a meeting. I can't miss this meeting. It's really important to me. Because we often miss our lunch because we're too busy doing stuff. And that's the slippery slope, really. So, and these are all actions. These are all things you can take responsibility for. Rowena, I know you've asked me, we can't wait for somebody else to come by and do it for us.
No, but can I ask you a question on that? So so in my situation, I have a lot of teachers who contact me, and I talk to them about boundaries, and they say the problem is if we say no to something that the head teacher or our line manager has asked us to do, we're made to feel guilty, and we're made to feel as if well, this is their perception, but I do understand it because I've been in that place, as if others are doing things, and therefore, in order to carry the load as a team, I need to say yes, where I know that in saying yes, it's going to tip the balance between surviving and actually not surviving.
Yeah.
What would you
And
say?
at the end of the day, that's organizational culture. And if that is the culture, and it often happens after change and fear and redundancy or whatever, and this can be very much used to support and build healthy, high-performing teams as well. If the culture is like that, then it's a toxic culture, and that's where, at whatever level, either you decide to do it personally. No, I'm not going to feel guilty if I don't, because that's what it is, and I'm not going to be made to feel guilty either. I'm going to give it, sorry, I've got to go now because I've done my shit. And actually, schools over the years have and particularly the schools I've worked in, like boarding schools, where it's worked on goodwill, and then the goodwill runs out and your culture's gone, and that's when it becomes toxic and so on. So it starts personally, but unfortunately or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, directors statistically are more resilient than shift workers. Actually, who part-time shift workers is the least resilient. But the culture has to come through there. And that really comes on to the second one, which is the future focus. It's your own purpose and personal control, but equally the organization's purpose and personal control. So I do a lot of work with values. What are our values individually? Have a think about it. What's really important to you? A lot of people say what's really important to you: personal health and happiness, family, all of the things that they completely forget about when they go into stress and anxiety. So your values, your goals, your actions, and the barriers might be a toxic culture. What decisions am I going to make about me in order to do that? Second, so the personal control, again, we've only got a certain bandwidth, and there's only a certain amount of stuff we can control, i.e. how we're thinking. I can't control how you're thinking. I can't control how you on the podcast are receiving. If you don't like what you're hearing, you don't agree with, that's your business. But we tend to spend too much time on stuff we need to let go. And we're clogging our bandwidth with worrying about, what so-and-so's thinking about us and so on. Resilient people don't get impacted quite as much as non-resilient people by the sort of chatter. And some of it is, what's the problem I've got? What outcome do I want? What can I control? What can I influence? But what do I need to let go? So political situation in the world is not something I can really do anything about. So I need to put my bandwidth in things I can control. So the third one, as I meant, goes into that, which is the inner drive, self-belief and motivation, thinking traps, catastrophizing, ruminating, fortune telling, all of those things. And I would, as a coach, you listen to how people are talking about things. I often say to my wife, our house is very clean, I can tell you. But we have got a black Labrador that does molt. Black Labradors molt, poor thing. And very much, this house is disgusting. Well, how powerful is it? Listen to how other people are experiencing, and yourself. How are you? I move then through to flexible thinking, which is just understanding moods, your mood, but other people's moods, what makes people highly performing, revived, highly stressed, usually emails, by the way, and then exhausted. And how we can positively frame stuff.
Yeah, you just said usually emails, by the way. Can you go into that? Yeah. What do you mean?
There's this myth that email is a good way of communicating. I mean, it's a quick way of communicating, but it's a very one-dimensional way of communicating. And I think if you think you can get away with an email, get on the phone. If you think you can get away with being on the phone face to face, and I think we fire off emails and we think we're busy. I did have once when I was working, somebody sent me an email at 2:00 in the morning. Instead of being impressed that they were working at 2:00 in the morning, I actually went up to them and said, "Are you okay?" Because I want you to have sleep at 2:00 in the morning. Is everything okay? Blah, blah, blah. So yeah. I was frightened of my emails. Yeah, I became frightened of my emails because I couldn't control what was all that lovely stuff that was. So I think protocols around personal, when you're going to look at it, but also organizational protocols. It's not cool. It makes me anxious if you sent me a whole load of emails at 5:00 in the morning and I wake up at 7:00. I've got an inbox going like this. It causes me stress. It doesn't cause you stress, but it causes me stress. And the final one, and I think fundamentally in schools, it's the strong relationships. You talked earlier, this is very much your network of support. This is where you're getting your emotional piggy bank either replenished or drained. Yes, there's a lot of emotion going out. This is where I think everybody should have an avenue, an independent avenue for support, not just if you're crashing on the floor. Just they do it in social care, clinical psychologists, people in traumatic. Well, I think in schools you're dealing with emotional stuff all the time, and we need a culture where we say, "I'm going to give you some support." So, and just finally, and I guess with that whole support thing, it's building trust. And if you've had toxic environments, it's quite difficult to build that trust. But the final sub-pillar is accessing support. I wish I knew then what I know now, and I wish I talked to more people then, because staff rooms, and I've been in many, can be, because I talk about who are your radiators, who are the people that if you just want to lift, you just give them a one of the first things that go if you are stressed and burning out is you stop talking to your friends and because you think you're embarrassed, and those radiators. Think about who would I call if I just want to laugh, because laughing is great, and I've been on a laughter workshop. They are brilliant. Against those drains, and staff rooms with low morale can just, somebody else describes them as mood hoovers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually in
So
my first book, I talk about drains and radiators. And one of the keys to self-awareness is starting to look at yourself and thinking, actually, am I being a drain? Because you're so exhausted sometimes and you're
yeah,
really running on survival, but that doesn't mean you need to be a drain. And there,
yeah.
you've already talked about lots of the strategies in building resilience and that sort of thing. And I guess I know we're out of time. And Andrew, you've obviously got such a lot to give, and maybe we'll get you back on the podcast to carry on.
Yeah.
But if people want to hear more from you, how would they find out?
I'm
Where would
on
they go?
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, Andrew Lewin. I have my own business now. It's coaching and so on. It's Project 1000. It's www.project1000.co.uk. And I'll tell you how it is formed. The 1000, I counted, because I wanted to work for I found my stress trigger was working for other people and the pressure I put on myself to perform and all of that sort of stuff. I thought, right, by my 55th birthday, when I took my teacher's pension, I am over 55 now. I don't look it, but I am. So I counted back 1,000 days from my 55th birthday when I could take my teacher's pension. And it happened to be World Mental Health Day in October 2019. It turned into about Project 100 because I started working for myself on the first of just before COVID. I'm now in the second sort of 1,000 days of that, and that was all about goals and actions and what I was going to do, but it all fitted in with my own personal goal and vision to work for myself and to look after myself, most importantly, and then let the other things almost not, they don't take care of themselves, and I've never been happier, Rowena, than I am now.
Yeah. And I suppose the challenge for people who are leaders and teachers at the moment and still in school is that what you said is you wish you'd known back then what you know now. And then you would probably be still in education. And
Yeah,
actually, that's what
absolutely.
people need to hear today. There are ways
Yeah.
of becoming the best version of yourself, of thriving in school, and you just need to invest in yourself, invest in your team, invest in your organization, take some action.
Keep people well rather than waiting till they become unwell.
Yeah.
And the Wellbeing Project will say those who use their psychometric assessment of this impact have a return on investment of 11 to 1. It's the most productive way of spending your money because
Absolutely.
recruitment costs,
Absolutely.
cover costs, all of those sorts of things are all wrapped up in your thing. So you might as well just keep people well. I went to a big
Absolutely.
organization, big school, and I said, you could deliver all of this for about £10,000 a year. They were a multi-million pound thing. Just £10,000 a year. Is it worth it? Because that will save you tens of thousands of pounds if your culture, if your exact culture changed through this.
Absolutely. We're both completely agreed on that. Hooray. And on that note, I'm going to say goodbye to everyone. Thanks for listening. And thanks, Andrew, for all your wisdom.
Thank you, Rowena. Real pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for listening. I hope you took something of value from today. If you want to connect, I'm at rowenahicks.com, or I have a Facebook group, which is Preventing Teacher Burnout. So I look forward to connecting to you at one of those.